Welcome into the Autzen Audibles Postgame edition. I'm Matt Prehm, Erik Skopil, and Jared Mack live from West Lafayette following Oregon's 35-0 win. I'm going to call it a dominant win. I'm going to call it an impressive win. I don't care how bad Purdue is. It's the first shutout in program history since the 2012 season when they shut out Arizona at home, and it's the first road shutout since 1992 when they won a Civil War 7-0. How thrilling would that touchdown have been back then? But nonetheless, 35-0. And you take away probably 20 minutes of football, the third quarter and part of the second quarter, and it's about as flawless as a performance you could expect from an Oregon team that everyone was like, trap game. Hey, it's a short week. You got to go across the time zone. You just beat Ohio State. Now you're playing a terrible team. Trap game. Like the announcers were rooting for an upset, calling the game, and there was nothing even close to it. I think this was a pretty impressive win.
Yeah, 100%. I think you put it out there pretty easily. Like this was the trap game. It was one of the trap games in the schedule when it was first released. And Oregon just came in here and scored 2 touchdowns immediately and kind of just quieted the crowd here at Ross State Stadium in West Lafayette. Like it was pretty standard for Oregon. It was, again, one of those games kind of similar to Michigan State where they get out to this big lead and then kind of fumble around in the third quarter and not a single point was scored by either team in that third quarter. And then they just, had 2 later touchdowns in the fourth quarter, put the game on ice, and it's a 35-0 victory. Could it have gone better? Yeah, there were some moments of execution that didn't really go great, but I think, it's incredibly hard to play perfect football. I mean, Oregon didn't even do that last week against Ohio State, and they still won that game against the number now 4 ranked team in the country. So to expect perfection is a bit too much, but this was pretty damn good. Like Matt said, it was a dominant win. And, I come away from the field, and people who stayed until the end saw a dominant victory. So I have no problems with it.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can gripe over, do they have the killer instinct in the middle 2 quarters, or did they not put the foot down? I was never really concerned. I don't think anybody. This is probably the most stress-free Oregon win of the season to this point. Maybe Michigan State, because that was 31-0 in the fourth quarter. But very similar game where Oregon's defense played exceptionally well, did basically whatever it needed to in critical situations, and we can get into some of this. Purdue did actually moved the ball. I don't want to say better than I expected, but pretty effectively at times. But Oregon's defense
better than I expected, yeah.
Yeah, I think maybe that's fair. But Oregon's defense, stuck up when it needed to, right? The 3 fourth down stops, the turnovers they forced, the forced punts when the ball did get past midfield because of sacks and because of, frankly, Purdue made a lot of its own mistakes with false starts, and that pass game never really got going. And so I think you come out of this feeling, again, very similar to that Michigan State game where the offense was kind of up and down in the middle of the game, but the defense was so consistently good in this game. And we'll talk about this as we get through this, but Oregon was missing a lot of its top defensive and offensive players, mostly offensive players in this game. And I think one of my big takeaways just coming out of this was how well everybody kind of filled in and how seamless it felt. Like no Trayshawn Holden. I thought Justice Lowe was excellent in this game. A couple catches, really good blocking on the perimeter at times. I thought he was excellent. I thought Terrence Ferguson, a really unexpected scratch. Like we didn't know this was coming. He was practicing earlier this week. It sounds like he had his appendix removed. I've been there before. It stinks. That sucks for him. I hope everything's going to be okay. I'm sure it will. But Kenyon Sadiq and Roger Saliapaga and Pat Herbert had to fill in and play a lot more. And I thought like Sadiq in particular was another player like Justice who really stepped up and played well. And then in the second half, even no Jordan James. Didn't really matter a whole lot. I thought Noah Whittington played really well. I mean, we saw some Jay Harris and Jaden Lamar. I mean, I thought, the run game wasn't maybe what we thought it could be. Had 131 yards. This Purdue defense has been really bad against the run. But overall, there's not a whole lot to be frustrated or disappointed in. And I thought really the most impressive part was just how the younger players stepped up, both filling in for players. But even at the end of that game there, you saw some of those young, freshmen or sophomore or second or third year guys step up on defense and make sure that they preserve the shutout. So I think this is a great team effort top to bottom, and a lot of young guys who hadn't maybe seen or been in a lot of big spots like this all kind of filled in the way you'd hope to see.
Real quick, Jared, what did Dan tell us about Ferguson's timetable for return? What's the latest there?
I mean, he didn't really give too much of a timetable. He said that he hopes he's back soon. I can read you the quote verbatim if you'd like, but basically it's just in the middle of the week he had pain in his side and then he ended up getting his appendix removed, I assume, probably on Wednesday or Thursday, or hopefully not today, and didn't fly with it. But he just said that he's hoping that he's back there soon. He did the whole, like the classic Dan Lanning thing. It's like if you asked him, he would have told you that he wishes he were on the field immediately. But obviously they couldn't do that. So Eric, with a guy who has had his appendix removed, how long did it take for you to get back to full strength?
I was 12 years old and it burst and we caught it post bursting. And so it took me a week about in the hospital and about another week after, but I had secondary, I'm sure, medical attention compared to these student athletes as a 12-year-old who lost like 15 pounds because his appendix burst unexpectedly.
Yeah, I don't want to like guess too much, but I would assume he probably doesn't play next week. There's probably no need for it.
That would surprise me based upon someone who's had it, but I also would say like I'm always surprised how quickly these guys return from things. Like I had a concussion this year, and you guys know it. I was basically out of commission for 6 weeks. Mm-hmm. Players have concussions in the NFL or in college football, and they play like a week or two later. So it's kind of hard to know, but it really stinks, and it's very painful. And I'm obviously happy they caught it. It sounds like when they did.
Yeah, I mean you're hoping he can come back next week, but like Matt said, I don't know if it's necessary. That the tight ends played pretty well today. I think the blocking from the tight ends was suspect at points, and that could have been why Oregon didn't really run that well in the first half. Dan said it's because they started playing a 4-4 front, or not a 4-4. They started playing more 4-man down rather than the bear front that they're used to doing. So they found some things that worked in the second half clearly, but didn't have it in the first half. So we'll see. Hopefully he's back next week, and maybe that'll help on the ground game. But I wouldn't. There's no need to rush back from it, I would say.
Yeah, they had just 17 carries for 43 yards in the first half, rushing the football. 18 carries for 88 yards in the second half. So some marked improvement, but I don't know if we want to say like it was highly successful. And that's not what Dan said, but there's not a notion that they were like really good running the ball in the second half. This is just all defense story today. Like I think Tony Tuioti and Mateo were unbelievably good off the edges. I thought Brandon Johnson was another guy that was like sneaky good. So was Devin Jackson. Bossa had a great forced fumble play that was recovered by Kobe Savage. Harmon and Caldwell continue to be really good. And one of the takeaways for me was like, this was just another reminder of, we talked about all offseason, like, did they add enough portal guys up front? Did they have enough talent there? Like, without Jordan Birch again, we weren't expecting him to play. It didn't even look like they were missing maybe their best defensive player. And some of that has to do, I think, with the skill level that Purdue has. But at the same time, like, the group was loaded. And to Dan's point post game of talking about there were guys that were ready for their moment when their moment presented itself. We saw multiple young defensive linemen make plays and get tackles for loss late in the game to preserve the shutout. This was just an overall impressive game that you walk away with like, yeah, the opponent wasn't good, but it wouldn't have mattered. Oregon's so good there.
Shutouts in general, like, I just don't want to pick them apart. I mean, you could gripe about the fact that let me just pull up the rushing stats here again. Reggie Love had 93 yards on the ground, and Purdue ran for 208 yards. That's not ideal, right? But the flip side of that is their quarterback attempted 19 passes, threw for 93 yards, had an interception, and they totally took him out of the run game. He had 48 yards rushing. 23 of those came in the fourth quarter against some of the reserves. And it was evident early on, Oregon was really bought into finding ways to stack up Ryan Brown when it was a designed quarterback keeper, or if it was an RPO. They just, I thought, defended that extremely well. Jared, Jared was gone for a second. Are you okay?
Yeah, we're good. I almost just got locked out, which was my biggest fear. I went up to the Purdue's SID earlier. I was like, hey, I'm in the visiting radio room. Please, nobody lock me out. And I caught a lady trying to lock me out. So I got to shut the windows when I'm done, but We're good.
You're
We're
good.
So sorry. Go ahead, Eric.
No, you're totally fine. I just wanted the update because I saw your screen went blank there briefly. But no. I was impressed about the fact that like what we were talking about coming in was like Ryan Brown's legs. Were they going to be able to stop him? Again, he had 48 yards on the ground, but they really held him in check for most of this game. He was running all over the place. Like it's actually kind of a miracle he didn't have more turnovers in this game. Like he put the ball in. It was close a lot of times, and there were several plays where he could have been sacked and he escaped it or got the ball out or whatnot. So I think the front played awesome here. I thought the secondary was really good, especially in big moments here. I mean, not that they gave up a lot of through the air, but there were several fourth down pass deflections by Oregon defensive backs, including Roderick Pleasant, obviously the Cam Alexander interception to seal it. So. Yeah, man. I mean, there's probably not an area that you're really concerned about aside from tackling and the fact that Purdue ran it a little bit more successfully. But again, it's a shutout, and I don't think we're here. It's a shutout, and like Purdue really never totally threatened. Like they moved it, they could never really get past like the fringe of the red zone, like the 35-yard range. And I think that's a testament to this defense that you got to celebrate a shutout. It doesn't happen very often. It had been 12 years for this program.
One total red zone trip for Purdue the whole game. One.
Yeah. And they missed the field goal. That wasn't great, but like Eric, like you just went through, like the D-line was really good tonight. There were points where I thought Purdue did a good job of attacking the edges and then really setting the edges and working a lot of counters, working a lot of like handoffs and like every once in a while it'd be like a pop pass from Brown to a wide receiver coming across. But I think that was all game plan oriented, and then ultimately Oregon kind of shut that down. And when Purdue could not get 4 or 5 yards on first down, they were so far behind the sticks in their playbook, and it was just so obvious. It was me and Alec Dietz, who works for the Register Guard, we were talking up here. It's like, oh, first down, they lost a yard or gained a yard. Like they're behind now. Like let's see what they can do, because when they were putting third and long or shoot, I mean, they went for a 4th and 11 really randomly at one point. Just wasn't going to happen. Like Ryan Brown just didn't have it, and he's a redshirt freshman, so that happens. He's a young guy. But their whole offense with him, when it was a passing down, was like a rollout to the right. And Oregon did a really good job of staying with the receivers, staying with the tight end, and just shut it all down. And that's how they got a couple sacks tonight. But Brown still got out of it. He ran a little bit, but I thought they did a good job just holding him in check. I thought they did a good job in general holding the run game in check. Just like every once in a while it'd be a chunk play, but it really be like a chunk play for like 12, 15, 16 yards. It wasn't 20, 30, 40 yards. Tackling needs to improve. The interior defensive line, I feel like, collapses too much, and they just kind of go right by the running back or the quarterback in these situations. But overall, I mean, yeah, like you said, it's a shutout. You have to celebrate it. And they were able to get pressure a lot. Like basically anytime Brown kept the ball, dropped back, or like a flea flicker when they did that, there was pressure all the time from Oregon's edge rushers. So I thought they did a good job.
I think there was a little bit of like, you didn't know what to expect when Illinois faced Purdue last week. So maybe you could credit a little bit of that, but they had 536 yards, Purdue did, on offense. Brown accounted for 400 plus yards in that game. And now that Oregon has played them, like, I was already confident Oregon was going to beat Illinois, but like my confidence went way up seeing what Oregon did to Purdue and seeing how Illinois kind of struggled there defensively. Because Oregon also has a mobile quarterback in Dylan Gabriel. And we saw a little bit of it tonight. He had, I think, one designed run that wasn't like a scramble, but Jordan James continues to just look really good. And, you know, he had a point where he scored 3 touchdowns in 3 straight plays, and only one of them counted.
That was terrible, by the way. Sorry, but that was really rough watching that live, because even on TV, the replays, it was like I thought he scored both times, like kind of obviously. But
yes.
Sorry, Matt. Yes. Go ahead.
But I just look at this and think like Oregon's run game. Yeah, they didn't really perform well. I think Ferguson getting knocked out probably messed with it late in the week. But I also think like Gabriel was just slinging it, and they didn't really need to run the ball a ton. And they were clearly looking at this game as, we do not want Jordan James to go over 20 touches, probably 15 touches in this game. And get him, out of the game quick, and he's by far your best back. But I just walk away from this thinking like the offense, like Gabriel continues to look really good, and while they didn't run for a bunch of yards, James continued to look really good. 2 touchdowns tonight and a really low workload.
Yeah, we didn't.
I was going to ask you, Jared. Did Dan share anything on why Jordan didn't play in the second half?
No, James Crepey, the Oregonian, asked, and he didn't even touch it. There was no explanation as to why James never played in the second half. I think it could have absolutely something to do with workload because he was just sitting on the sideline, helmet on his head, and just watching Noah Whittington play basically the entire third quarter. So I don't know. We'll see next week. But again, I didn't need him. No. Jaden Lamar and Jay Harris do their thing in the fourth quarter. So didn't need him.
How much do you think this was maybe like a trial period of like, let's give Noah a bunch of reps, see what he looks like. And then if the game goes like we think it does, let's give Lamar and Jaden a couple touches and see if we need to maybe open this thing up from a running back 2 perspective. Because that's like the biggest topic on the board is Whittington is not performing and fans want to see a ton of Jay Harris. He looked solid. I'm not going to say he looked great in mop-up duty. I thought Lamar looked explosive. Maybe they were trying it out to see if they need to open this thing up again because Whittington had the unbelievable catch for the touchdown, but running the football again, it was a struggle.
Yeah, he had a hard time. I think my thing with Noah is some of it seems like it's trusting his instincts of when to cut up field. I think there are times where he just misses the hole and runs into people, or is just a step slow and not as decisive. Like, I think what I really appreciate watching Jordan, especially these last couple of games, and this was his worst game probably of the season from a rush output. I still thought at times he was really dynamic, but you just trust him to find the crease and get upfield pretty much every time he touches the football. With Noah, I don't necessarily feel as confident. So, Matt, I don't know, Matt, like to your question, I don't know if that's what's happening. I do think it's fair to be at least critical or kind of question where Noah's at and why this has been such a struggle for him. Jay Harris and Jaden Lamar both, I thought, looked explosive and probably a little bit more successful over the course of their time on the field. I also know it's like mop-up duty, and at that point in the game, I'm not sure how much effort Purdue put into it because you have to remember, like, the third quarter, Oregon didn't score at all. It was still a 3-score game, and for Purdue, you're at least feeling like, hey, we keep getting off the field here. There's some momentum. I thought once Whittington caught that touchdown pass, it kind of seemed like Purdue folded a little bit, and that benefited both Harris and Lamar when they came on the field. But, yeah, will be interesting to see. I mean, they really just play Jordan James probably 60-65% of the snaps, and then Noah plays the rest in games of consequence. Maybe they'll take a look doing something different. But I'm not really sure it needs to happen. And I say that while acknowledging that I don't think Noah's played anywhere near as well as Jordan James.
Yeah, I think Noah's just lost his step from his ACL injury last year. And, it's been over a year now, but it's an ACL injury. Like, those are still hard to come back from. And I know he's back and he's had his explosive plays. He had a 20-yarder today. He had a 27, 28-yard touchdown a couple weeks ago. Like, he still has it. So
the kickoff return was great, obviously.
Right. It's just there's like both of you guys said, there just looks like he might be a step slower potentially compared to Jaden Lamar and maybe Jay Harris. I thought both Jay and Jaden looked good. Yeah. Is it anything where it's like, oh, we're going to put him in the number 2 role? I'm not so sure. It could certainly be because, like when Noah's out there, it's like under 4 yards a carry. And that just, frankly, isn't good enough. And you obviously have your bell cow and Jordan James. That's just not how Oregon's operated the last 2 seasons under Dan and then Kenny and then Will Stein last year. Like, it's just not what they've done. They haven't split it 50-50, of course, but it's been more one guy than the other guy. But it's been a lot closer to that 50-50 role. Like last week against Ohio State, it was Jordan James 90-10. It wasn't even close. So something coming from that RB2 role would be really good for Oregon. And I think I'm going to naturally transition here to having a wide receivers 1 and 2. Evan Stewart, again, had a huge day, just shy of 100 yards, 4 receptions. He had that big, I think it was 48, 49 yards down the right sideline in the first quarter. Another tremendous contested catch with a guy draped all over him. Had another couple like 15, 17-yard plays, and then Tez Johnson. He just had his day, 75 whatever yards it was, and just a guy who's really, really hard to cover in space. And you can see it. It's like, oh, Tez is open for 5 yards. He's gonna get 5 more because the first guy's gonna miss, and maybe the second guy's gonna miss. So that being part of the offense is really starting to click. Dan compared it last year where Troy Franklin got off to such a huge start at the beginning of the season. Defenses honed in on him. And then all of a sudden, Tez Johnson against Cal had 12 receptions and 8, 9, 10 like receptions a game. So I think it's a dynamic offense. This was without Trayshawn Holden, who we haven't gotten to, but did not play a snap, did not see the field, traveled, dressed, warmed up, did not see the field. So that was kind of a weird roster decision, but I'm no head coach. So when you get Trayshawn back in the lineup, Justice Lowe had a couple catches today. Kenyon Sadiq looked great in space. It's a pretty dynamic pass offense when your rushing attack just isn't working like it was today.
One thing about I'm glad you brought up the comment from Dan of not Kenyon Sadiq, but Evan Stewart's kind of progresses. I went back and looked at where Oregon's kind of like targets were and receptions were from receiver perspective last year through the first 6 games of the season. And Evan Stewart is right on track with the number of targets from a percentage standpoint that Tez Johnson had through 6 games. And as we are seeing now, maybe this is the start of a trend. He's starting to get more targets. The production's going to go up, just like Tez did. Like he had 106 targets last season. 30 of them came in the first 6 games. The 76 came in the last 8. I'm not going to say Evan's going to get 76 targets over the next 7, 8, 9, 10 games that they play, but I wouldn't be surprised if all of a sudden the preseason expectations of maybe 2,000-yard receivers or 2 guys that go over 800 yards each, like that could come into play with Jared's point of, teams focusing on Tez and opening everything up for Evan.
What I really liked tonight and frankly the last game as well was just the commitment to trying to win over the top. And they did it early on their first drive, get the 49-yarder down the field to Evan. I thought that really just kind of opened some things up for them, even though I don't think they really had another vertical pass completion all night. I know Kenyon had maybe one that was 25 yards in the air, and he ran 15 yards more, so it was like a 40-yard completion. But in general, like after that one, it was a little bit tamer. But I thought that changed things for Oregon, and I thought Purdue was kind of forced to play things a little bit more honest from there. And I thought, when you've got a weapon like Evan Stewart, and I know fans were really kind of concerned or curious about why he wasn't as involved early. You're just, I think, thrilled to see a player with his skill set involved in an offense that has so many dynamic players. And he does things that nobody else on this offense really can do. And if you were to go through, I think this year and look at targets / completions of 30 or 40 yards downfield, he pretty much has all of them with the exception of the one Tez had. Was that against UCLA where he got over the top? Right. So it's clear what they want him to do. And I think the fact that they've been able to connect on those deep shots now, each of the last couple of weeks and what that opens up for this offense, I think it's really significant. And I'm going to be curious to see, again, as I said earlier, and we kind of talked about, Oregon didn't have its full complement of offensive skill players here. They were out, one of their top receivers. They were without their top tight end. The second half, they didn't use their running back. I just think the fact that you saw a week ago what this looks like when everything is involved, and then you fast forward a week and you remove, a couple of the big pass targets and it still looks good. I think that really speaks to the scheme and Dylan Gabriel and how kind of in sync everything is, because you could have made the case that this was a game that they really struggled on offense. And I know it wasn't perfect. The middle of the game, they really weren't able to get much of anything clicking, but you still saw them score 35 points and finish with 420 plus yards of offense. Like, I thought it was pretty damn good considering the fact that you're missing a couple of key pieces out there.
Yeah, to answer your question about the big plays from a passing perspective, Dylan Gabriel threw the 39-yard, I don't know if it was a screen to Kenyon Sadiq for 39 yards. That happened at the 14:43 mark of the second quarter. They had one other play the rest of the game go for 15 or more yards, and it was a 20-yard pass to Evan Stewart for a first down. I think it was on a third down too. Yeah, 3rd and 9.
Mm-hmm.
So you're right. They didn't really try at all, or at least they didn't. Gabriel at least didn't attempt very many over-the-top passes. That one, though, the Stewart to start it, that was a thing of beauty. One of his better throws of the year. Just dropped it in the bucket. Any last parting thoughts for you, Jared?
No. Nice stadium, though.
I was
really
going to ask
place.
You. Yeah, tell us about the environment, because we were at home for this, and I'm going to guess most listeners are too.
Yeah, actually, fair amount of green here. Very surprising how much green there was. I think I might have posted a picture on Twitter eventually, but nice environment, good place. Campus kind of reminds me of Oregon a little bit, just kind of like how it's set around. And, college town in its true variety here, West Lafayette. This is a good environment. I think there's 57,000 people here. The stadium holds 60, 61, something like that. So, again, sizable crowd. A lot of people were here for a team that's 1-5, and we're a 30-point underdog today. So, and then last thing, 2 last things. Press box, lovely place. And then the last thing I had was, I don't know what the hell Oregon is going to do about their band, because they cannot show up on the road when you have a band like Purdue's, because they're going to get embarrassed anywhere they go. I am now a huge pro band guy, and I don't know what Oregon's going to do.
I think we need a rebranding. I just think the uniforms don't look. I know there's like a thought to be cutting edge, but they don't look like there's something about a traditional band look that looks so cool. And when everything's kind of, and this, I am not traditionally a huge pro band guy. You remember, Jared, when we went to Ohio State, and I was kind of like, whatever.
You remember me?
I remember you, but
the greatest thing on earth.
But the more I think you see Big Ten bands, because Ohio State's same kind of thing, even in a smaller capacity last week, like there's just a different feel compared to how they're carrying themselves, how they look. And I think Oregon, there's a post on our board after the Ohio State game about this very topic, and I don't feel surprised that we're feeling the same way coming out.
Well, I can tell you what they're going to do. They're just not going to send them to any traditional Big Ten school for a road game, because they will get
embarrassed. I'll tell you what, the Purdue band today made a train on the field and had the train go down the field with steam blowing out of it. So hats off.
More offensive success from the band than the team.
Yeah, 100%. They had the world's biggest drum. Biggest drum.
How does someone not become pro band after seeing the world's biggest drum? Come on.
So those are my parting thoughts. That's all I got.
I had just one, and it's a real small thing that we can zoom by. But how about Dan going for a 50-yard field goal again? Missing, but I thought that was kind of telling in a couple of different ways about the trust that they want to have in Andrew Boyle. And the kick was left, but it definitely had plenty of leg, and it wasn't like it had no business of being kicked up there. But just it's 2 times in the last 3 games they've tried a 50+ yarder, and obviously they made one and missed this one. But I don't know. I just find that to be something to kind of keep an eye on, because when you get into November and then into December and maybe even into January, you're going to need to be able to make long kicks like this, because games are going to come down to where the points are really at a premium. And obviously you'd like to come out of this game talking about another 50-yard make, but just sort of interesting to me that they've got the trust now 2 out of 3 games here to try a long one. And even though this one felt short, that sort of something that kind of stood out to me. Not that it's the biggest thing in the world.
I thought it was really funny. I saw a tweet that said the world would have gone into a different vortex if in 3 weeks Oregon made 2 50-yard field goals.
Yeah, it would have.
It's about right.
No. All right, that's going to do it for us here on the Autzen Audibles Podcast Postgame Edition. Until Monday when we do the mailbag, that will be our next one. Safe travels to Jared back home. Enjoy your weekend of football. Some big games tomorrow. Yeah, we'll be keeping track of that, and we'll have more coverage of this win on duckterritory.com throughout the weekend. But until then, you've been listening to the Autzen Audibles Podcast.
Talk to you later, folks.
Peace.